Hey friends, my anti-gun violence advocates, street workers, all of my fellow activists who are fighting for justice day in and day out. Hope some of you will join me and listen to this and tune in. Um, I think that on this day, which is the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, it provides a rare opportunity for us to reflect and to think about some things. Think about the state of the movement. Think about the state of the justice work, the anti-violence work, the truth-telling movement, and to think about how we're doing things and sort of hold ourselves accountable as we push forward and do this work. The reason why this came up for me today is because I'm originally from Boston. I lived and worked in Boston for many years, and there's a district attorney's race that's extremely important that's coming up in September as the primary. And having worked in that office and having worked in Boston and knowing a lot of young people that still live in Boston, I know 60, 70, 80 young people in the Drayton, Baker, Bardwell, Quincy Street, Columbia Road, Monadnock area. And a lot of those young people are now 18 years old, 20 years old, 21 years old. And I know that this election is going to have a huge and important impact on their daily lives, because if the next district attorney continues business as usual in Boston and refuses to hold the police accountable, like the other day when we saw that incident with Officer Zach Crossan, mistreating a young man who was just walking down the street minding his own business, accusing him of basically having no job and being a deadbeat when he didn't know boo about him. I know that these are the kinds of things that continue if they're going to continue if the next DA doesn't step up and begin to hold the police accountable. And so I've been putting together a sort of 3 or 4 point checklist for people in Boston to demand of the candidates for district attorney before they agree to support any of the candidates. And I was like trying to tag a bunch of people in Boston, and it was like I couldn't tag the people that I wanted to tag because everybody that I wanted to tag has beef with somebody else that I wanted to tag. It's like I can't tag this person because this person's beefing with this person. And all of the people that I'm talking about are, bold, fearless truth tellers who are doing important work, who I learn from every day, whose voices need to be heard. I was just thinking about this, and it was just so frustrating because so many people that I know that are in Boston and elsewhere doing this work, that are anti-violence advocates, that are street workers, they're working with young people who are involved in the streets often, who have generational beefs that go back years and years and years. And we're stepping to young people who are out there going hard and saying, yo, man, come on, think about this, like dead this, you can put this down. You don't need to do this, right? And like, we're trying to step to them with any kind of credibility and say, hey, I know that this serious thing went back years and there's all kinds of trauma and there's all kinds of people in your family that were shot at or killed or worse. And, but we're asking you to, to not participate or engage in that kind of behavior anymore. And yet, meanwhile, we can't even tag each other in a post because so many of us are fighting over some petty squabbles or territory or a bunch of other nonsense. And there are people that I'm hearing are holding forums that have already, backed certain candidates. They're supposed to be nonpartisan or neutral, and they're kind of acting as the people who are giving the information to the public in Boston about this DA race. And yet, meanwhile, they're behind the scenes already working for certain candidates, and there's all kinds of stuff going on like this. And it's just, it's so disheartening because even especially today, when you look back on what happened on April 4th, 1968, 50 years ago, so many people think that the end of the civil rights movement started that day when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And this is a huge misconception. And I'm saying that as someone who has, studied the civil rights movement. Don't take it from me, right? There's this trilogy of books right here that I've put next to me that you can see here by Taylor Branch called Parting the Waters. First one, Pillar of Fire was the second one, At Canaan's Edge is the third one. And basically it chronicles the United States throughout the life of Martin Luther King. And Taylor Branch spent years and years and years and years combing through all of the civil rights documents, all of the FBI papers, all of the declassified information that came out after the civil rights movement, and put together this amazing compendium of fact-checked resources that every student of the civil rights movement needs to read. And what you will see if you read these three books is that the civil rights movement was dead way before Martin Luther King was shot. Way before. Right? And it was dead for the same exact reason that I'm doing this live right now, trying to post people in Boston. It was dead because people started getting petty, and they started talking about each other behind their backs, and they started saying, nah, man, these kinds of people can't show up. This certain group of people can't show up. This person doesn't deserve to have a platform. This person shouldn't be speaking. Right? And it's the same kind of behavior that we're seeing today that is rampant throughout activist circles, that is rampant throughout anti-gun violence circles, right? I've seen adults that haven't done shit, right, about anti-gun violence preventions being cut, right, that have done nothing as thousands of people have literally lost their lives for no reason, right, attacking students who are finally saying, you know what, nah, we're going to step up and do something. We're going to hold a rally. Granted, their platform might not be perfect yet, right? Sure, because you want to know why? Because the systems that we're talking about have been lying to them. Not a single one of their teachers, I guarantee you, has told them that for 30 years we've known how to stop gun violence. I guarantee you none of their teachers told them that, because me, going through 4 years of college, three years of law school, 3 years in the DA's office, and like 5 more years working as an activist, didn't know that either. I had to go dig this up on my own, right? So I'm seeing people criticizing these students when for the first time young people are stepping up and saying, you know what, our government's not working, and it's not working for us, and we're going to work outside the system and start to tear it down. And what's happening? Everyone's like, this, that, the other thing. And it's like, man, wow. Yeah, their platform is not perfect. Yeah, they might have excluded some people, but damn, they're doing a hell of a lot better than a lot of us have done in a long time. And when someone starts landing uppercuts to a completely failed counterproductive system, we should be clapping. We should be cheering them on and encouraging them, right, to include other things in their platform with love and solidarity and support, right? My students at Borough of Manhattan Community College made this video, this amazing video, to help the Parkland students understand that there is tons of data that will support them getting behind violence prevention programs and initiatives in the inner city, right? And I have probably 200 or 300 activist friends on social media. You know how many of them even like so much as liked or commented or shared that? Like, for real, man. Like, none, right? People just glance over that, And you know, people have been doing this not just to me, but to each other for years, like subtweeting and just ignoring and not amplifying anybody, even if they're telling the truth, even if they're landing an uppercut, you know, to the chin of the NYPD or to white supremacy. They just look at it because you're not the right person. You're not the right messenger. Nobody's looking at, well, this might be the truth, right? This might be something that we all need to rally around. Doesn't matter who's the messenger. The truth is the most important thing. Justice is the most important thing. You'd think, right? And that's why I think this is so troubling, because if you look back to the years that preceded the civil rights movement falling apart in the mid to late 60s, what you see is this incredible, blessed community that is full of grace, right? People that were participating in the civil rights movement, the people of color that were starting and leading these movements, these sit-ins, these lobby-ins, right, at movie theaters and lunch counters, that were getting on the buses for the freedom rides, they absolutely did not have any reason to trust white people who were showing up that were strangers. None, right? The history of what has happened in this country would have said to those people, you would be crazy to trust these folks, right? And that's what I think is missing nowadays. What is so important and that's missing is this notion of grace. Grace is giving people things that they don't deserve, right? It's offering to someone love and trust and support and solidarity, even if they might not deserve it, right? And that, to me, was what Martin Luther King's life was all about, right? Other movement leaders weren't necessarily about that, right? You saw other leaders that were sort of getting involved with Martin Luther King, but all of a sudden they're starting to say the opposite. Like, no, certain people shouldn't participate, and we're not going to allow those people to be here, and Martin Luther King shouldn't be getting a platform, right? And you see that start to break down, and you see all of that continuing today. Whereas this amazing notion of like grace created something that was so incredibly powerful. It created this blessed community that was able to move mountains, right? That was the strength and the heart and the beauty of that movement. When people started to come together, right? White people just showed up, right? Like Andrew Goodman and Mickey Schwerner just show up from New York and start working with James Chaney, driving through, the rural towns of Mississippi, trying to register people to vote and to get involved, and said, hey, we don't know you from boo, but we're going to put our lives on the line next to you, right? James Chaney and all of those folks in Mississippi could have said, you know what? History tells us we shouldn't trust you, right? And they would have had every moral, justifiable right to say that, right? But they didn't. And that is the difference, right? That is what is missing nowadays. I don't like to talk about my experiences necessarily, because I feel like my experiences aren't nearly as bad as what a lot of people of color experience. You look at like Erica Garner, who was an activist after Eric Garner was killed by the NYPD, and she basically lost her life from the stress of dealing with what I'm talking about right now, right? She died of a heart attack at a much too early age because of the stress of having the state literally murder her brother and then having no accountability from the justice system. So like, when I look at things like that, I don't like to share my story, because how the hell can I center my experiences, right, when people of color are actually going through experiences like that? But there comes a point when I feel like my experiences prove a larger point that is more important than keeping quiet, and I think that this is one of those experiences. So today I want to talk a little bit about what my experiences have been since 2010, right? So in 2010, I was working at the Vera Institute of Justice. I was a senior program associate. I was making a shit ton of money, right? I was going on awesome vacations, and I had a great apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment all by myself, living the dream, basically, right? And I went down to Louisiana, and I facilitated this omnibus criminal justice reform effort with the Louisiana Sentencing Commission, and what I saw down there was some wicked, wicked shit happening, right? I'm not going to get into it here. I've written about it and talked about it extensively elsewhere. But basically what happened was my bosses said to me, we're not allowed to go public with this, with what happens. Because if we do, then our state partners are no longer going to trust us. They're no longer going to want to work with us. And our funding is going to get cut. And pretty soon we're all going to be out of jobs if we keep throwing punches like that. And what I realized in that moment was, if I keep working in a field like this, if I keep working in an organization like this, I'm going to be censored. I'm never going to be able to tell the truth about what I've seen. And what I've seen is wicked. I've worked as a prosecutor. I've worked as a defense attorney. I worked in criminal justice policy reform. I once ran a nonprofit that was working very effectively to help young men get jobs and turn their lives around, right? And we couldn't raise any money to keep the program going, just like all these other effective programs in Baltimore, in Boston, in Chicago, and elsewhere that keep getting cut, even though they're saving thousands upon thousands of lives, right? And so what I'm basically saying is that I've seen the system from every vantage point, and what I've seen is wicked. And you can't speak boldly about what you've seen. You can't tell the truth boldly in those positions, because as soon as you do, the people that are in power all of a sudden don't like you anymore, because you're throwing, bricks over the walls into the castle, right? And it makes them look bad, and they don't want to deal with you, right? Once I pointed out that the city of Boston let the Boston Miracle lapse very quietly in the middle of the night, right? All of a sudden, I can't fucking raise a hot nickel in the city of Boston. So anyways, in 2010, I moved to New York because my career in Boston was over. I'm in New York. I decided I can't do this anymore, right? And I decide that I'm going to do what the people in these 3 books that I just showed you did. And I'm going to start to convince my people, white people that I know and care about, that we should get involved, that we need to step outside of the system like people have done in the past when the system doesn't work anymore, right, to get justice. So I asked, what did they do back in the day? Well, they marched, right? They did sit-ins, they did lobby-ins, they did all kinds of nonviolent stuff. So I started inviting everyone that I knew to come with me down to City Hall in New York, because at the time, stop and frisk was running rampant, off the rails, violating the rights of millions of people. Ray Kelly and Mike Bloomberg are getting up in front of the cameras and lying to the entire country, telling them that the only way to prevent gun violence is to violate people's rights and to crack down on them and to raid their homes, right? Meanwhile, there's 30 years of data out of Johns Hopkins, out of Harvard, out of Northwestern, out of a dozen other colleges of peer-reviewed reports that, rock solid evidence. The Bureau of Justice Statistics has given these programs a green check mark, showing that we could end gun violence very effectively by investing in these programs. So I'm like, no, let's go down to City Hall and refuse to leave, right, until this reality until this is remedied, right? Because this is absolutely insane. And all my friends, all my family told me I was an asshole, right? And I had a choice to make. Should I go through with this by myself, right? Should I take all of my privilege, every single bit of privilege that I've ever accumulated, throw it onto a bonfire and light that on fire? Should I literally take every single piece of privilege I've accumulated in my whole life and light that shit on fire and see if it will then make my people engage? Right? Now I'm thinking, having been a student of the civil rights movement, that if I go ahead and do that, that there is going to be a blessed community of people on the other side. Just like there was back in the day when people showed up and said, hey, I'm willing to give up everything alongside of you to fight for justice. Let's do this, right? Back in the day, people were like, word, we got this, right? Long before the movement began to splinter, long before Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, right? Viola Luzzo, another white woman who just showed up, and all these people that were down there who had no reason in the world to trust her said, you know what? Thank you. Let's rock together. Let's do this together, right? Because that kind of unity is what shows the world the kind of power that we're talking about, right? That kind of unity where people come together when they have every reason not to, when they have every reason to distrust and dislike and, have beef with one another. When they have every right to do that and then they come together in spite of that, that is the most powerful thing in the world, right? And so I'm thinking to myself, well, if I go ahead and do all this, then, my people there's going to be this beautiful community on the other side where we can work together in solidarity. We can find out another different way to make a living. We can find out another different way to eat, another different way to pay our bills, another different way to do things better, right? Another different way to hold each other accountable, aside from the criminal justice system and these broken structures that clearly don't work. Right? So I go down to City Hall. I'm by my damn self. No one shows up. I'm like, screw it. I'm going to do a food and water strike. There's no more way that you can put your life and your privilege on the line than doing a food and water strike, marching around City Hall and demanding that I'm not leaving until either I collapse and die or until the city ends stop and frisk. Right? Now, since then, this is why I'm using my example, right? People have said, oh, your tone was all wrong. Oh, you're too arrogant. Or, you didn't go about it the right way. It wasn't strategic enough. Literally since that day, aside from 2 or 3 people, I have heard nothing but criticism and fuck yous from activists, from friends, from families. Here I am all right, let's burn all of our privilege to the ground and then find this community on the other side. And I'm going to meetings after this thing happens, right? And I'm having people tell me that I need to shut the fuck up, right? Because I'm not the right person to be saying things, right? I have to wait till the end of the meeting. I'm watching people bickering for 2 hours about whether they should march with a permit or without one, right? And I'm seeing infighting, and don't get me wrong, by the way, there are people doing great work. It's usually just very small groups of people, and it's in very isolated cases, okay? I'm not, very clearly right now, I am not discrediting the amazing work that certain activists and certain people are doing because they're out there. What I'm saying, though, is it's always small and it's very rarely scaled to include a broad consensus of people from different communities, different places, right? Now, going back to my experiences, because I think they paint an extremely important picture of what I'm trying to say. What has my life been like since that happened, right? Since I went from making 6 figures, living a damn good life, right? I have been unemployed since that day. I have applied to hundreds, if not thousands of jobs that I am very, very well qualified for, right? I haven't even so much as gotten a phone screen. Not a single phone screen. That was 6 years ago. 6 years ago, man. What was my crime? What was so bad that I did that I should be exiled from the workforce for 6 fucking years, man? Right? My ex-wife and I, who are now separated, right? This has put an enormous amount of stress on her. She's basically had to support me. I've been in the apartment trying to write books, trying to write columns, trying to do anything that I can to tell that story because I basically reduced my entire life of privilege down to a story, to a pile of fucking rubble, right? And I'm trying to find anyone that I can find to tell that story to so that I can at least somehow some way help her with the bills, right? We got a new baby. We had a new baby at home, right? And I'm writing for my life. And all I'm hearing from people is, oh, well, we really need to hear this story from different people. You're not the right person to tell this story, or, and that, by the way, there's a lot of truth to that. That's absolutely true. I'm not telling this story to detract from the importance of people who have been affected by these things telling their stories, because there are absolutely not enough of them. This is why I usually keep quiet. This is why I usually don't say anything, right? Because there is so much truth to the fact that there aren't enough people in those situations telling stories, right? But then I see people like Rachel Dolezal getting book reviews, right? And I see all kinds of other assholes like Milo Yiannopoulos and all these other jerk-offs getting, contracts and things. And it's like, well, right? And I could go on and regale you with how difficult it has been. I've made, $20,000 a year for the last 3 years. Like, it is a joke, man. My life is an absolute joke. Like, I have said no to going out with my friends hundreds of times. I don't get to go to dinners, right? I don't go on vacation, like, unless it's free, right? I recently canceled a vacation to Vermont because they told us it was going to be free, and then we found out we're going to have to pay for stuff, and I don't want to be that annoying person who had to sit in the hotel room and couldn't afford to do all the stuff, so I just didn't go, right? This has happened to me dozens of times since this happened, right? Like, I once had surgery at the Brooklyn Hospital, and my ex and I had a young baby. We had our baby with us, and we were in downtown Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Hospital, and we lived in Brighton Beach, and we couldn't afford to take a car home, so I took the fucking subway home from a hernia surgery, right? And when the drugs started to wear off, I almost threw up on the subway at like Kings Highway, and I had to take my hat off and almost chucked in my hat, right? And like, this is what my life has been like since I decided that I was going to do what everybody says we should all do, which is burn down your privilege, right? And so I'm not saying this because I want pity or sympathy. I'm saying this because what we need to do immediately, if we are ever going to have a chance, right, is stop paying lip service to Martin Luther King while tearing each other to shreds. There should be no situation where activists like Monica Cannon are going to the hospital every 2 or 3 weeks, right? Because no one else is doing the work. The reason why my situation has been so hard, the reason why I've been the one that's been going through all of this is because all of my white family and friends and my legal colleagues and others are not doing the work, right? You're not participating in this work. And so what that's causing to happen is that it's causing the very few people that are doing the work to literally work themselves to death. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. The New York Times just wrote a story last week about the toll that this kind of work takes on people. And the reason it's taking a toll on the Monica Cannons of the world and people like Erica Garner and many, many others, right, is because not enough other people who have privilege and platform are participating in the work. Okay? And so what we need to begin to do, like today, like not today, like in 1968 or 66, right, is we need to start creating this blessed community where we support each other and lift each other up as we do this work, as we strive for justice, as we take on a completely out of control and unaccountable power structure that no longer serves us, right? And to me, one of the most important things that's missing today that happened then is this notion of grace, right? Is this notion of, I have every right to be upset with this person who said this thing. I have every right to be upset about this race of people who have done these things, right? This person said XXX traumatic, hurtful thing. I have every right to be angry with them. But because this is so much bigger than me, I'm going to show some grace in this moment, right? And I'm going to give people what they don't necessarily deserve, right? Because I know that there is great power in that. And some people might say, well, that's just asking people to take on more trauma, and so well, fine. You're missing the point, right? Maybe we're going to have to just create this blessed community without you, right? Because I'm willing to say that I've been through all of this for the last 6 years because my people haven't been there to support me very much at all, right? Very few people that I know, right, have been sharing anything that I've been writing, right? I know you're all reading it. Do you ever share it? Do you ever publish it? Do you ever ask your friends, geez, why has this guy been unemployed for 6 years? Why has he applied to hundreds of jobs and he can't get a job? What's his crime? What is his crime? Oh, he went down and did a hunger strike to stop the NYPD from violating the rights of millions of people? Oh, he was too arrogant about it? Oh, he wasn't nice about it? And this is what's crazy to me is that Easter just happened. So many of the people that I know are Christian, right? The man that you supposedly worship, right, was a radical Arab who went into the temple, home invasioned that shit with a whip, started assaulting people and chasing them out, and then maliciously destroyed all their property by flipping it over, right? I mean, that man would have gotten literally arrested and charged with like 300 crimes if that had happened today, right? And here I am going down and doing a nonviolent action, and you're all treating me like I'm the fucking Antichrist, all right? Christians that celebrate Easter, you're actually very much the kind of people that I'm talking to. Because here we are talking about grace, right? About creating a blessed community where we love and care for each other as we fight for justice, right? And because that doesn't exist, the people who are doing that work are going through incredible amounts of trauma and hardship and struggle, right? And I am still a white guy with a ton of privilege. I still have a law degree. I can still go get a job as a bartender and barely make ends meet, right? But that is not a sufficient reason, right, to say, oh, well, we should just ignore what he's saying. It's not a sufficient reason to get involved. Like, the reason why these things continue is because we all continue to sit quietly by. Look at what these youth just did in Florida. In a minute, in a second, they decided no, and now the whole entire nation is paying attention and saying no. Why haven't we done that with all of these other issues? We've been watching the police kill people with impunity for 5, 6, 7 years now, and we just never put our foot down. All my Gen X people, all my boomers, all the people that are of these older generations, we're just sitting here watching that. Like, come on now. Come on, man. So anyways, I'm rambling a little bit. But I feel like this is such an important moment, to look at the state of our society. Like, our society is falling apart right now. Like, the climate is a complete disaster. There is still a line of cars outside every city in America 30 miles long with one person each in them pouring exhaust into the atmosphere. We haven't even begun to touch that, right? The systems that are supposed to be serving justice, right? Providing accountability for public safety and so forth are completely derelict in their jobs. They're investing all their money in employee salaries and overtime, and none of their money in what data has shown for 30 years can turn recidivism off. This is a catastrophe of the administration of justice, and we're all just sitting around watching it like we have no power. It's like, look at the teachers in Oklahoma, in West Virginia, and elsewhere. We have all the power, man. And so I'm looking back at people posting about Martin Luther King today, and I'm like, there is an Easter 2 days ago, and I'm just like, man, how does this disconnect between the people that we claim to celebrate, like Jesus and Martin Luther King, exist? How is the gap that is there so big? And yet in our own lives, we as anti-violence advocates can't even squash petty beef. I can't even tag activists because they got beef with some other activists. No, man. That's not it. So anyways, this is why I don't do impromptu lives, because then I just start rambling and going on and on and on. Thank you for those who are watching. This is a long and continuing conversation. But I really hope we get there. I really hope that we can create this blessed community where when people take their lives and they put them on the line and they take their privilege and they burn it down, and they land uppercuts to white supremacy, they land uppercuts to completely broken, ineffective, manipulative, lying systems, that we can begin to rally together and support one another and, hold each other accountable with love. I'm not saying that we should not be, holding activists accountable when they do things that are traumatic or hurtful, like when people do misogynistic things or patriarchal things or racist things, right? We should hold them accountable, but we should hold them accountable in love and not at the expense of the solidarity that this movement for justice requires, right? Like, I'm going to end this with a story that I had from yesterday, right? I saw a friend of mine that I know who grew up on Humboldt, young man of color, who recently got out of prison, who's been grinding and grinding and grinding so hard, right, to get a job, to get set up, to get a car, to stay away from that hustle that got him tangled up in the system in the first place, trying so hard. And here he is. We all are. Dozens of advocates, dozens of, reentry and justice advocates and anti-violence advocates, right? So he's on there on Facebook yesterday, and he's just like posting these really angry, hysterical posts like about women and about this and about that. And my first instinct is like, go after him. Like, I went after him. I was like, bro, why are you posting this highly problematic shit? Like, what are you talking about, man? Like, just because someone had views of a certain thing doesn't mean that they should be killed by the police. Just because, and I'm just tone deaf. I'm da 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 da. And what I didn't realize is that he was hurting. Like, he was hurting bad. He's been going harder than anyone has ever gone who got out of prison, right? Making music in the studio, using all his money from his low-paying wage job at a food chain restaurant, like, to go into the studio and to pay for his car, and everything's going wrong. One thing after another is going wrong. My first instinct was to go at him, like, on social media. And then, I private messaged him, and I was like, dude, wow, like, I'm such an ass. Like, he was hurting bad. Like, why he was lashing out like that because of how much pain he was in. And, like, I didn't even see it. Like, this is kind of what I'm talking about. It's like, I don't know what we're doing, but whatever it is, it's not what made the movement work back in the day, right? It's not what made the whole entire world look at Martin Luther King and that brought the media cameras and the attention of the whole world onto America and said, America, you're shameful, right? What we're doing now is not that. And there are going to be people that will say, well, we should never have to turn the other cheek. We should never have to expose ourselves to nonviolent trauma and nonviolent, harm at the hands of someone else. And that is absolutely your right to say that. And you're well within your rights to believe that, right? Because why does anyone want to take on more trauma? I don't blame you for saying that. But that comes with a caveat, because there are a lot of people who are willing to take on that trauma, right? Who are willing to take on that work, to take on that hardship for the sake of something bigger, right? To leave behind a legacy, a personal legacy, so that when you close your eyes for the last time and you look back on your life, you can say, you know what? I fought for something bigger than me. Like, I fought for what was right? I could have put my foot down and said, no, I don't want to take on that trauma. I could have put my foot down and say, no, those people didn't deserve whatever they didn't deserve. No, I didn't, right? I exhibited grace, which is a very, very beautiful thing, right, in the human experience. So what I'm trying to say is, if you don't agree with that, cool. But you don't have to then attack everybody who's going through it, right? You can still participate in the blessed community. You can still participate in a loving and sharing, community of people who, when these kinds of things happen, privately go to each other in love, right? And create accountability structures outside of the criminal justice system, right? Like, during the Me Too movement, just yesterday, someone I love very much, Nasreen, posted about a situation at work where a man came onto her and her boss did nothing, right? And during Me Too, I remember asking all the men that I knew, hey, let's get together and hold a meeting, right? And let's find ways so that women can come to us, tell us who the person who has committed a problem or something, committed a wrongdoing against them, harassment against them in the community, and we'll go to them with love. And we'll say, yo, man, we heard that this happened. Like, we love you. We want to hold you accountable. We want to figure out what's up. Like, what happened? What caused this? Is there something that we can do, right? Is there something we can do to help you get through this or get past this, right? And work through it. And you know how many people responded, man? Like, I'm not even going to get into it because I know that that no one did. Right? And it's like, come on, man. Like, I'm always putting ideas and requests for help and just requests for advocacy and requests for all kinds of things out there. And it's like, nobody ever responds. And like, the reason why activists like Erica Garner, right, are dying too soon is because none of you, not none of you, but most people, the overwhelming majority of you, don't respond when people ask you for their help. When you see them out there raging against the machine, you don't think to yourselves, man, what they must have seen must have been traumatic. You think, oh, loud and scary, I need to walk away from that. Right? And what I'm trying to say, I guess, this is dragging on and on, I know, I'm sorry, I want to thank all of you who are tuning in. What I'm trying to say is that we need to get past that. We need to get to a point where when we see people doing crazy things, right, or doing hurtful things, we say to ourselves first, man, it must be because that person is hurting or something happened. Is there a way that we can handle this differently? Is there a way that we can handle this with a blessed, loving community, right? Outside of the criminal justice system. Is there a way we can do this better? And maybe there isn't. I don't know. But what I'm saying, I guess, is that we need to all start to act in the spirit of trying to figure that out, right? When we see police structures that are completely backwards and doing all the wrong things, right? We send out candidates for DA that are going to start to demand that all cases go through restorative and transformative justice conferences before they're prosecuted, right? So that when we prosecute people and put them to jail, it's after all other less invasive rehabilitative options have been attempted. Because that's us saying that we love the people around us, right? And we want to try and help them before we lock them up in a cage that's only making the problem worse, right? To me, that is the spirit of the civil rights movement. That's the spirit that made that movement something much greater than what it was. And that was the spirit that died long before Martin Luther King died, when activists started focusing on, I'm right about this, instead of, shit, man, we need to work together and build this blessed community. And sometimes that means that we have to put aside, when we're right, we have to put aside our pride, we have to put aside certain things. So, all right, I think that's about it. Thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate you. Let's do this.